back. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Gird Your Loins. That's the name of this show. I have with me Nathan. How do you say your last name? Schmolze?
Schmolze.
Schmolze.
Yeah. Means,
There's no T.
No T.
No
Means
T at all.
chicken fat.
It means chicken. You didn't have to reveal that today.
It's a point of pride for my family.
Okay. You can be proud of the chicken fat.
Yes.
That's fine. What's the origin of that? Like, what?
It's like it's Yiddish.
It's Yiddish. Okay. Schmolze. All right. You know, it's funny. Like, I don't usually give people nicknames, and I usually call everybody by their first name. You know, like athletes will always go like, "Hey, Jackson." You know, they'll call it by their last name type of thing. But for some reason, I want to call you Schmolze so bad.
A lot of people do.
It's just it
works.
seems to go. It seems to go with you. I don't know why. So, and the name of this podcast is probably a massive surprise to you.
Gird Your Loins.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
You like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is Gird Your Loins, and I'd like to remind you again, the purpose of this is for the edification of young men by exposing you guys to people that I find interesting, providing they live within 15, 20 miles of my present location, and also that you become a well-rounded individual. You know, if you're a specialist, you're an expert or in something. Like the world wants you to be, you become a tool in somebody else's toolbox. So I want to expose people to as many different things so they can kind of be like Renaissance men, you know? Renaissance men. Lots of different experiences.
I'm like the worst person to have on for this.
Lots of different tools. Well, that's fine. You know, you can be a specialist in something and you'll edify everybody anyway. You know? So then we'll gain something from, you know, your expertise at your expense. You can continue doing whatever you're doing, but yeah, I kind of think that it's a valuable thing for guys
absolutely.
to, you know, branch out different areas of topics and life experiences. Why we're talking about jujitsu, our first podcast, and then talking about like having families and things like that. But you know, that's not to not be a specialist. Obviously, you can be like an expert in something for sure.
Actually, I mean, I don't even know where I heard that idea first, but it really stuck to me as true. The idea that in our culture, we've just been so forced to specialize based on, you know, the government's desire to use people effectively.
Yeah.
What I would attribute to. And like ever since I heard that, I'm like, man, I really gotta work on myself and my own character on that, because it's like it is true, and it really does limit you.
Yeah.
In your abilities and whatnot.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's going to have something that they're better at than other things, for sure. But I think that the motivation, not just the government, but I think that, like, people that want to hire us, you know, people, like corporations, like, you know, what do you do for a living generally is...
So I'm a software engineer.
Software engineer. So whatever company you're working for, like, they want you to focus on being a better software engineer for their company, you know, and anything else...
At the expense of everything else.
Yes, right, because that's what they've hired you for, and anything else is really just a distraction. It doesn't benefit them one way or the other, you know. But it wasn't always like that. I mean, a lot of companies, you know, that's why liberal arts degrees were so popular, because, you know, you were after men that were like men of the world that like knew how to navigate lots of different things, especially if they were like managers or CEOs, or like, you know, could manage through like the chaos of the world, like a good sailor or something. You know, it's like you're just focused on this one rope. You're not going to be much of a captain on the ship, you know?
Yeah.
So, but really, I mean, let's talk about the thing that you're most into. I'm like knocking this mic all around. Like I can't like jujitsu this thing correctly yet, you know? All this stuff in my way.
Can't quite snatch the pebble.
What's that?
Said you can't quite snatch the pebble in front of you.
Yeah, no. Yeah. That's like kung fu, right?
Yeah, it's like kung fu fighting or whatever.
David Carradine, before he strangled himself to death or something. Wasn't it like kung fu assassins that got him?
It's something like that.
According to his daughter.
I don't know.
I don't think it was kung fu assassins.
I thought you were
got
naming
David
the movie.
Yeah. Do you want something to drink, by the way?
Yeah, no, I got water.
Oh, you got water.
Yeah, thanks.
Water's good. God made it. So, but the thing that you're, I did it again. The thing that you're most into right now is
Is what?
Well, they gave me this fancy pamphlet,
fancy pamphlet.
about the abolition movement.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to answer that like a question or if you're going to tell me what I was into.
I don't know. You could have came up with anything right there. I'll just go with it.
It's, pudding pops, actually. Are my
Pudding
passion.
pops. Okay.
I'm a fan of them.
Hour and a half of pudding pops. All right.
No, but yeah, I am very increasingly specialized in the area of abortion ministry.
Right.
Specifically the abolitionist movement, which we distinguish ourselves from the pro-life movement in that we're trying to provide a biblical answer to abortion, whereas a lot of the pro-life movement really tries to, deal with a secular approach.
Right.
Even like Christian pro-life organizations will adopt the same strategy. So really just backing up and being like, all right, what does the Bible actually say about abolishing evils in general from society?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's something I heard about. I'm trying to think the first time I was exposed to it, probably through like Jeff Durbin or something like that, like a super popular thing like that. A good guy, yeah. Because you know him personally now or something. I don't know.
Actually, I met him.
Did you?
Just
I know.
for the first time.
Yeah. That was in, what was that, in Ohio? You took a trip out to Ohio?
Oklahoma.
One of those O states in the middle of the country.
Yeah.
Just fly over them.
We spoke on the same stage.
I know. I saw that. Yeah, I saw that you got that.
He had like, he's the big name speaker. I got like one little session over there. It was
yeah.
I was like honored.
I fast forwarded through his part to see your part, just so you know. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
I was like, I've heard Jeff before. I know what he's going to say. I want to hear what...
I hadn't listened to Jeff all that much before that conference. So I'm like, this guy has a lot of really interesting stuff to say. And
oh, yeah.
I'm like,
yep.
I need, one of the areas where I need to grow and become more well-rounded is understanding the post-millennial perspective. Because he's
right.
Post-mill. I don't know if he's theonomic, but that's probably more information than most of the viewers would know. But he's a part of Christianity that I just I haven't really.
If he's not, he's made a few. I can put it that way.
Yeah.
I don't really know his stance on that, but that was like something I was going to ask you about abolitionist movement. But we'll save that for later.
Sure.
But yeah, how was that? I mean, how was that experience going out to Oklahoma, Ohio?
Ohio?
Yeah, Oklahoma.
There was no Ohio involved in this trip. I might have driven. I didn't even drive through it. But no, Oklahoma was great. I've got a lot of friends out there, and it was just I don't know. It's rewarding because in Oklahoma, that's kind of where the first abolitionist legislative victory was, where we actually got a bill of abolition be put forward, and I was there for that 2016.
Nice. Nice.
But and it's not a victory in the sense that the bill's passed and we haven't expected it. It's like with William Wilberforce, it took him 20 years or whatever to get his bill of abolition passed. But the victory is that it really exposes the pro-life movement in terms of the leadership,
right?
Because they're playing the people. Like if somebody's watching this who's pro-life, you probably just don't know necessarily that your views differ significantly from
the pro-life
the pro-life movement, the leadership.
Yeah, I didn't know. I mean, I had no clue until a few years ago. Yeah. Like the term abolitionist in relation to the abortion issue wasn't even on my radar. I had never, and then even when I heard of it, I'm like, isn't that what we're trying to do here? Like, I don't understand. Like,
yeah, pro-lifers, rank and file, they just think, we're trying to end abortion.
Yeah, like we need another group. I thought we had this already. Isn't this what we were doing this whole time?
Well, and in the abolition of slavery, because that's where we get our ideology from, is we look to history, and they were people who successfully abolished evil using the gospel, using the word of God. And in that movement, they actually had to deal with a false anti-slavery movement that was taking all the resources, taking all the funding. It was called the American Colonization Society. And they were basically taking all of the passion, of the Christian passion that existed, and funneling it into a strategy that was fundamentally, technically racist. It was racist in policy, and it was claiming to be doing good, but actually doing bad things.
Yeah. That was a messy part of history. There's there's a lot more. I mean, I've been studying the Civil War. My goodness, I was like fascinated with it when I was a kid.
Sure.
And of course, like from the perspective of a northerner, you know, being up here.
Those are the bad guys.
And nah, I wouldn't say that. I would say there's plenty of bad guys all around.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
the naive thing is that you're the northerner.
Yeah.
The South is all bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think there's plenty of bad to go around. And you know what? I mean, the more I learn about history, the more I learn it's just a complicated mess, a massive complicated mess. And there might be movements, and there might be all kinds of different philosophies, and you know, individuals, people have like varying views on lots of different things. You can't lump everybody into one thing very easily, for sure. So what was how did you first end up getting into did you start like, were you like pro-life originally, or let's just use that term right now? It's you know, were you always pro-life, or did you have like different views than even that?
No, I inherited a pro-life view from my parents, and actually my dad took us out to do abortion protests. I was embarrassed by it.
Okay.
I didn't want to have anything to do with that.
Most kids are just embarrassed to be out with their dads.
Period.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a good dad who actually, you know, did stuff with us sometimes, whether we wanted to or not. But yeah, I wasn't. So I was pro-life positionally in terms of, you know, I believe abortion's wrong. But then I would differentiate between people who are that. That's most of evangelical Christianity,
Right.
Catholicism or whatever.
We hope.
Yeah. It's waning, but I wasn't involved, right? So I wasn't part of the pro-life movement. So my involvement in abolition came when it was very providential, actually. I had the Lord had been working on my heart with regards to just love within the church, especially. I'd come to believe that a lot of churches that I had been exposed to anyway really seemed to be lacking in love for one another. And as all that stuff was going on in my mind, I drove up to my college for some reason, and I saw this crazy woman on the side of the road holding a picture of an aborted child with her kids out there.
Lunatic.
I got so angry at her. And just because, and I remember the thought I had, I was like, it's people like that make Christians look bad.
Oh no.
I'm so embarrassed.
Oh my.
But yes, I thought that. And then
people tell that to Ray Comfort all the time.
Oh yeah.
Stop.
Yeah, it's just so bad thinking. It's just sloppy thinking, really. And so about a year later, what happened was an old college friend of mine named Liz reached out to me randomly on Facebook. I was never on Facebook then. First time in 6 months, and she just.
You're on Facebook now?
No, well, more now than I was even then.
I was like, this is what you consider being on Facebook?
I've since backed away significantly. I don't like the platform. Anyway,
yeah.
But yeah, I would literally be on there once every 6 months just to see whatever. And she caught me on the one day that I was on and said, "Hey Nate, do you want to watch the Abolitionist Declaration of Sentiments?" I was like, my plans for the evening got canceled. Sure, whatever. I have no idea what this thing is. And they
I would have just said no.
I have no idea why I said yes.
Like, I'm going to the bar. Good night.
I think it's because I hadn't seen her in years. I'm like, oh, my old friend Liz, that would be cool to reconnect. My plans for the evening got canceled. Why not? So I watched it, and I was like, whoa, what these people are saying sounds really like biblical, and it's contrary to what I've like believed. Is there something an area where I need to grow intellectually here? So I started getting involved because I was intellectually intrigued. The movement matched something that I'd observed in other movements, like pattern, where, like with counseling, there's like the secularists over here, and then you got the people who are trying to build on the secularist foundation, but use Christian terminology.
Yep.
But then you got the people who start from Scripture and go from there.
The nouthetic people.
Yes, the nouthetic.
I know words.
Stuff.
Yeah. I was at ACBC training 1 year, and so I got into that quite a bit myself.
Did you actually go through the program?
I did the first step, but I never. Once I had to do some work, I gave up. No, I had there was some reading that needed to be done, and I think that I had already done like a year of like Bible training through the denomination I was in, the Evangelical Free Church.
Gotcha.
And so I was kind of like done reading theology books at that point. And unfortunately, none of the books that I had already read on the topics that they wanted me to read were on the list of books that they wanted me to read. So there was like because I had to read a systematic theology book, and there were like 4 different ones on there that they were all right with or something.
Oh, okay.
But none of them were Wayne Grudem's.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I'm not going through that again. And but I might get back to it again eventually. It is still something that I think about a lot, and I definitely learned a lot. You know?
And I never went through the program myself either, but I know a lot of people who did. I read David Pallison's dissertation, which just went through a lot of philosophy. I'm like, oh, this matches with other stuff. So
I got to meet him.
What's that?
I met him.
Oh, I went to his funeral. I never got to meet him.
He was at the conference I was at. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So there, you throw Jeff Durbin at me, I'll throw David Pallison at you.
I think you would. But yeah, so I just
because I could still meet Jeff Durbin at some point.
That's
true.
Like, well, I'm gonna meet both of them in heaven, so I don't know. We'll have to compete in the 1,000 years.
You're gonna throw that out there. All right, okay, that's fine. Then all of this is moot. So continue.
But yeah, so it matched a pattern. I was intellectually intrigued, and then the Lord just started to kind of convict me about just the. I was being critical of people in the church not being loving. And then like, well, in my city or in a city right near me, 12,000 kids are murdered every single year. And it's like, that's 3 9/11 attacks. I mean, people go nuts when there's a school shooting in some distant state, but we're just so, impotent toward this.
Yeah.
So I basically started just there was even a point where I almost like walked away because I wasn't yet convicted about that. But the Lord was gracious. He kept me intellectually intrigued, and I just kept talking to people, and eventually I was like, all right, I got to do something about this. So I just tried to figure out what other people were doing, take the good, leave the bad, and then
yeah, conviction. That'll eat you up, man.
Yes, it will.
That'll get at
Destroyed my life.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I had all these plans.
I know.
I got convicted about this thing. So, so why don't you explain, like, for people that don't know, like, what's the big, because I don't want to, like, we've talked about this before already, but like, what's the big difference between, let's say most people that are pro-life, I would actually think if they're if it's something that they hold genuinely and they are convicted to a degree about it, that they probably, like myself, would be like, I thought, they hear about this abolitionist movement and it's like why isn't that already, like, I thought this is what give my money to this organization and I'm thinking that they're working on getting rid of abortion. Isn't that the goal? And it's like, when you hear like this isn't quite how it works, this isn't what's happening, like it can kind of like take the gleam out of the gold, but what's the big, at its root, what's the big difference between the two movements or the mindsets between each of these?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a few ways I could answer that. If we're talking about what's at its root, because like, if you're talking about anything, there's like the root and then the fruit that it produces. And sometimes, like as Christ told us, you're going to know them by their fruits. It can be easier to tell that something's bad when you see what it ultimately produces.
Right.
But if you're trying to figure out like, where does this all come from? I've just thought so much about that. I mean, and this is a little simplistic, but it's like one movement is trying to base everything that it thinks on the Word of God. And one movement wants to base everything on what man can do.
Right.
And it's like, it's hard to prove that until you start looking at the fruit. But but it really is based on the Word of God, based on the idea that you should love God first before you love your neighbor. So one of the things that pro-life, I did a video on this on my channel, that like big organizations like Students for Life, National Right to Life, they'll be anti-abortion because they're pro-life, but pro-life also leads them basically to elevate human life as their highest ethic. So they end up being against the death penalty, even though that's biblical and God says that that's a good and a just thing. They'll end up being against, some of them will end up being against war, right? Which war is a horrific thing, but there are just wars to be fought.
Yeah.
And so you end up, when you elevate human life as your highest ethic, you, instead of love of God first, it really begins to compromise your ability to think clearly about these issues.
Yep. Yeah. I had just brought that up in our Bible study the other night. I was thinking about, I don't know why I related to my Bible study, because really I could have said this at any point. But, you know, seems to be like a lot of guys falling away right now. People even like you think about like Phil Vischer, like the VeggieTales guy.
Oh yeah.
Like just going like real woke, real squishy, real soft. Who would have thought from a guy that makes cartoons for little kids? Or even you got like the Bible Project guys, like different people that just kind of like what what you were saying, that if you don't start with a love for God first, what you really are doing is you start with a love of man. And then you work out from there and find a God that you think fits your version of loving man. And some parts of the Christian biblical God might fit that paradigm for a little while.
Yeah.
But then eventually you're going to come up to a point where this God of the Bible does not love man the way you think man ought to be loved. And at that point, you're confronted with either you reject the God of the Bible or you fashion a God to your own liking, and you commit idolatry at that point. But people are, and it's a biblical thing to love your fellow man.
Absolutely.
For sure. Like it totally is, you know. So that's why it can be so confusing. But if you're not loving people the way God wants you to love people, or you're not at least starting with the importance of loving God first and foremost, then you're not going to love people the right way.
Yeah, it ultimately becomes self-destructive. I mean, it's just like any satanic philosophy. And I'm pretty sure it goes back to the garden, right? Where, you know, man, you want to be elevating man to his highest good, right?
Yeah.
Be your own God.
Yep.
And it's like, no, that not only does that displace God from his rightful place in the universe as the creator, but it ultimately leads to man's own destruction. And so it's what happens with the pro-life movement is that there's so many abolitionists, the claim that we make, and this is something that's now being proven out in history, but that the real enemies in this battle are not the pro-choicers. Everybody knows that they're bad. The enemies are the ones that are coming as an angel of light, basically. That are that are and that's a sweeping statement. There's a lot of a lot of good pro-lifers out there that are simply deceived. There's been a lot of pro-lifers out there that were our enemies that have now really come over and are like, okay, wow, we understand what you're talking about now. We just didn't get it.
Yep.
But there are wolves in sheep's clothing that have like the really surreal thing is in the political realm, when you're in a state that's conservative, that's pro-life Republican, Oklahoma is 80 to 20. I just heard the number, 80 to 20 pro-life Republican everywhere, governor, judiciary, and legislature, of course. No problem at all to get a bill criminalizing abortion passed once you get it introduced. But it's only not going to be a problem if the people in there actually believe that abortion is murder and it should be treated as such. But they don't, and they use the pro-life label to get votes, and ends up basically destroying. So you begin with this false understanding of how to love your fellow man, and then the politicians you get in place because of it, it ends up just keeping this Holocaust in place and destroying human life all over the place, even though you start from a position where you're trying to do good.
And you'd think that that's like the best case scenario that we have in the country. Like
exactly.
why can't we get that
Oklahoma
thing
is
done?
The most pro-life state in the union is what
that's
they're known
crazy.
For.
And it's still like impossible to get. I mean, it's Oklahoma. You've seen the musical, right?
I've sung the song. I don't think I've seen the music
No.
itself.
I mean, they didn't even try Curly for killing Judd Fry at the end. It was a total kangaroo court at the end of the movie. But that's got to be frustrating. I mean, it's frustrating enough living in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Pennsylvania is slightly more hopeless.
Yeah, where hopeless.
That's the wrong word.
It feels that way.
We serve the true and the living God.
Yes, yeah, but the political hurdles would seem to be all cleared out of the way in a place like that. Yeah. But I think that there's like a philosophy that kind of undergirds everything politically for politicians. And I don't like to throw every politician under the bus and just say like, it's such a lazy thing to say like, oh, they're all bad. Yeah. There are a few good. But there's a philosophy that undergirds all of this institutional thinking that like, even when you're in power, it's like there's this monster of this institution over them that's like, no, we just can't. Yeah, we can't do this. Our hands are tied. Like, this is just the way it is, guys. Yeah. It's like, no, like you're in charge. Like you can do whatever you want. Like you can make the law, you can pass it, you can sign it, and then it's almost like they don't really want the responsibility, or what were the other, or they don't really want to abolish it.
Result. Well, I mean, one of the crazy things is that I don't want to make this claim too strongly because I haven't researched it myself, but people I respect make the claim that it's been talked about in the Republican circles and whatnot, that if they lost if they abolished abortion, then they wouldn't have the key thing that's getting them significant voting block portions. Like a lot of people will vote pro-life because they just hate abortion that much.
Right.
And it's like, it is, and that's how I see it used anyway, is that it is a political football. It's a way to get votes.
I think that's an incredibly stupid way to think. I mean, honestly, not that thinking that could be one of the factors, but I mean, like, if a politician is thinking, well, I don't want to get rid of this issue because this is what I got elected on, and then you don't live up to the campaign promise or do anything to make it any better. Like,
well,
what?
It works in the pro-life world because they do this stuff, right? They say to the people, like you're talking about this big institutional, well, we got the Supreme Court over us. We couldn't possibly oppose the Supreme Court, even though plenty of states oppose the Supreme Court. On
the left does it anytime they feel like that it's necessary. Yeah, it doesn't faze them one bit. Like, rules that on laws,
who cares?
Yeah. when they don't agree with the Supreme Court, they pass a law. When they don't agree with the court, they go to the with the law. They go to the Supreme Court, or they just don't listen to either one of them and take over Portland. That'll work too.
But on the Republican side, they appeal to this greater monster that they just have their hands tied.
Yeah.
And what they do is they say, all right, well, I'm going to pass something that's less than what I should do. So I can't abolish abortion as murder. Let's pass a law that will protect children from being aborted because they have Down syndrome, if that's the state of reason, which is a law that does absolutely nothing when you look at it.
Yeah, I was just reading that in your pamphlet, and it's like, this is really stupidly written. This is really goofy.
But you can fundraise against that because it sounds, to a person who's not thinking about it, it sounds like a great thing. Oh, Down syndrome, we want to be compassionate to these kids.
Right.
We don't like abortion. This is a good step in the right direction. Let's do that. And then because people aren't, because the populace is not thinking about this biblically, that's why the politicians can get away with speaking out of both sides of their mouth. Is that the expression?
Yeah. Yep. Speak out of both sides of their mouths. And yeah, I was reading this, and one thing that I thought was really interesting. Where did it go? I said that true love for parents means that they will be held accountable for their decisions. It also means that the law cannot give them any sort of cover for the grievous sin against God by calling abortion anything other than what it is, which is murder. And I really like that statement, that true love for the parents means that they will be held accountable for their decisions. And that comes out of that mindset that loving God first is the best way that you can love other people. Yeah. Which is totally foreign to most people. Like the thought that glorifying God in worship is the most loving thing that I can do, not just for myself, but also for my church or my family, or even upholding God's law would be a more loving thing for people than going squish on them and allowing them to get away with murder.
Get away with murder, basically.
Right. Yeah.
It's like when you look at what God does with our sin, he does not let us get away with it. He loves us too much. I think the argument is basically that if God allowed us to get away with sin, then basically we'd just bring hell on earth, effectively. If there was no judgment for sin. That's what we saw in before the flood, right? Is that the wickedness of man just grew so much. Murder in particular is called out in Genesis as something that wasn't being punished until after the flood. As Ecclesiastes 8:11 says, until when the punishment for an evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is set fully to do evil. And it's like we just have this inside of us where it's like if we're not punished for our evil, if there's not some standard that we're held accountable to, we're ultimately going to destroy everyone around us and destroy ourselves. Yeah. So the most loving thing that God can do is to actually punish us for our sin, and that is this is something a lot of people in the pro-life movement, even on the rank and file, don't understand, because we're talking about criminalization, and that means you do punish the woman and the man, anybody involved, the parents, whoever, anybody involved in the murder of a child, you punish them for murder. And the reason that's important...
I want to punish the men more, to be honest with you.
Second the motion, right? Yeah. Drop of the ball. Come on, man.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking like Adam level sinning here.
Yeah.
You know, this is the worst kind that you can possibly do. Like you didn't protect your wife or whoever it is you decided to have children with, which, just compound things. And now you're not even defending your children on top of that. I mean,
it's like, I don't want to get too controversial here, but it's like what Paul says about how the woman was deceived. But basically, Adam gets blamed for the fall of man because he knew what he was doing. And there are women in this fight who get deceived. Many of them know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
There are women who are being taken advantage of through deception, and it's the men really who are just not only dropping the ball, but they're often pressuring them, and the lack of foundation that men are supposed to bring to the family is just it's just not there in our culture.
I mean, not having been in front of an abortion mill myself,
Sure.
and you having the greater experience in that, if there was a man in the picture who's desiring not to have the abortion, what do you think of the chances of them actually going through with that?
That's tough. So, I mean, instinctively, I can give you an answer. I would want to have statistics more to back it, but
Right.
But my experience has been.
We're not doing science here, man. You can say whatever you want.
Okay, so I've seen all sides of this, right? There are men who we talk to them outside the clinic. They get convicted, and then they go in there to try to get the woman out of there and stop her from doing what she's doing. And they're, she stays in there. And then there's plenty of men who are just completely hardened to everything that we're saying.
Yeah.
And you see this woman crying as they're leading her in there. And you just know, it's just horrible. And it's like, it really is true that both Adam and Eve sinned. Different kinds of sin.
Yep.
And it really just depends on the person who is most culpable, I guess, or most who is the one in the relationship that's driving women there. But I think overall, if the men stepped up and they took responsibility for the child that they created, then
I bet you don't even see them there.
Not usually. It's often.
I bet you that in the situations where you have a man who is saying, even if he screwed up, that it's like, no, this is my responsibility, and I will care for you and the baby. I bet the vast majority of them don't ever show up there.
Yeah, a man who says that, they wouldn't even take him to an abortion at that point. Yeah. There are plenty of men there. They often stay in the car. They'll often drop a woman off and then come back. It's just
Spineless. Yeah, I mean, and for you young guys, I mean, have a family, for crying out loud. I mean, if you find yourself in a situation where you've gotten your girlfriend pregnant or something like that, I mean, don't compound sin with sin. Like, don't just add more sin on top of it. Like, that's not going to fix anything. That's not going to make your life any better. You're just throwing something away that's precious, and you're really cursing yourself with something that you don't want to, lay a hold of, and you're really not fulfilling your duty as a man to protect the woman that you've really kind of joined yourself with, whether you're married or not. You've taken on some level of responsibility for that person, especially if you've impregnated them, for crying out loud, and made another person. You got to make it right.
Yeah.
You do something wrong, and when somebody wrongs you, you want them to make it right and take ownership of it.
Amen.
I sound like Jocko Willink now, but that it is in its most highest form, honestly. Like, for a guy to take responsibility for anything, like, take responsibility of this.
Yeah.
If you've never taken responsibility for something in your entire life, this is the time to take responsibility for something. If you've taken responsibility for everything in your life and then you fail at this point, like, what good was the rest of it, But when you were saying before about, God kind of restricting our sin or giving us consequences, or like things would just like, go to hell in a handbasket, so to speak. I always think about in Romans 8, verse 20, it says, "For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope." So, like, I always took that to mean like God kind of cursing creation to futility, so that we wouldn't be so satisfied with our sin, in the hopes that we would turn from it. It wouldn't be so satisfying, because sin is satisfying for a time.
That's a great point. I actually never thought about that way. But that's what you see throughout the Old Testament too, is like, as people sin, and then he turns the rain away from their land, or whatever it is. It's
right.
Like the creation itself, all the benefits that we have, he just takes it away from us, and then we see the product of that.
Yeah, that's the whole pattern with Israel, right? I mean, he blesses them and things are great, and then they fall away, and then they worship other gods, and then he tears them to pieces, and they get judged, and then it's like, maybe we should worship God again. Wasn't that great?
That was better.
Yeah, but they fall in love with the creation rather than the creator, right?
Yeah. And one of the things you were just saying about don't compound sin with sin, I thought it's really a good encapsulation of the difference between abolition and pro-life as well, because that whole philosophy is just so prevalent in what the pro-life movement does, where you what's the passage? It's like, let us not do evil so that good, or somebody accuses Paul of saying, let us do evil so that good may come.
Right. Yeah.
And abolitionists are constantly saying, no, even if it looks like you're taking a measure, like a classic thing would be a rape exception, right? Allowing kids to be killed in the case of rape, because it looks compassionate, even though it's technically, or if you look at it, it's punishing the child for the sins of the father,
Right.
But it's like, what pro-lifers want to do is they want to add these exceptions into the law because they think it's going to be easier to pass. And what that is it's doing evil so that good may come. And it's like, whether you're talking about on an individual level with a person in an abortion mill, or if you're talking about just because even people at the abortion mill will claim to be pro-life, but they're just solving this.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Or healthcare.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's like, on all levels of this, it's like the people who are fighting against abolition ultimately are basically the people who are trying to solve evil with evil, and that's what we do. That's what the Marxists are doing today with their version of fake justice. And is that they're trying to solve what they perceive to be a problem of evil, and there are legitimate things, obviously, with racism and whatnot in the culture, injustices there, but they're trying to solve that by adding more injustice, by saying. I don't need to go too far into those guys, but but basically they want to implement policies that are against white people, so that they can better the conditions of black people as a result. And it's like, using discrimination to solve
Yeah.
discrimination. It's just philosophically bankrupt, but that's what people do.
Like fighting fire with fire. I don't think that's really ever helped put out any fires anywhere in the world ever. Not even once. I was thinking about that idea of like compounding sin, but I lost my train of thought. It happens. It happens as you get older. You just get used to it. Now, when do you have anything else to add about the abolition movement in general, or
How many days do you have?
well? Oh, here's a question I wanted to ask. So I see a lot of the bills in here that they give as like examples of like the failure of the pro-life movement, or the failure of even like the dumb bills, like the Down syndrome bill, where it's like this isn't even enforceable. Like this is completely impotent. Oh, I remember what I was gonna say about how oftentimes Republicans in particular will come to the negotiating table with the compromise already in mind.
Oh yeah.
Like they'll do all the debating on their own, and then when they get there, they've got the compromise in their hand.
Yeah.
And then they show it to the left, and the left is like, "Oh, we need to do more compromising on top of that." It's like, you idiot! Like that's not how you negotiate anything. Like you go above and beyond, and then you let them bring you the negotiation. Like, what would something like absolutely think of something like absolutely insane, like the most radical abolitionist bill that you could possibly like go over the top, go to the point where it's actually sinful. Like you've gone so far overboard as an abolitionist, it's now sinful and wicked for you to do, but it would absolutely make somebody like a Democrat's head explode. What would?
Okay, if you get an abortion, you die, your family dies. Anybody who's ever talked to you dies.
Yeah, I wouldn't be in favor of any of that, but except for the first part.
Told me to be sinful.
Yeah. Okay, all right. So like, if I'm playing devil's advocate as the Democrat, it's like that sounds absolutely insane. What if wouldn't it make more sense just to kill, to give the death sentence to the murderer, not like kill off their entire family? And you'd be like, yeah, that's a good point. I guess you got me on that one. Like you're a heck of a negotiator, But they never do that. They always think to themselves like, let's put the rape exclusion in the bill. And like, well, I wouldn't be in favor of that at all. It would be something to dangle at me if I could get 99% of it, and they came to the table with just that little thing. Mm-hmm. That would be tempting. Yeah. That would at least be tempting, but they never even go that far. Yeah. They never even let them, like you let them bring that to you. Like don't devise wickedness in your own bill. Like let them be the authors of this wicked rape exclusion thing,
They're the ones that are supposed to be the bad guys. Let them be the bad guys.
Right, exactly, And if you can't get anything done, then they're okay. Like hit them again next time. But I'll hear guys like even Ben Shapiro, guys like that they'll have their debates about abortion, and they'll give them the exclusion to the guys they're debating. They'll say, okay, but let's abolish all of it except for in the case of incest and rape. Would you be okay with that? And what do they always say? No, of course not. Of course not. They don't want the exclusions anyway. Right. So we see how disingenuous they are about their objections to all of this. So why even attempt to write it in the bill? Why not just go all the way, hit the home run? Yeah. Like they're not going to let you.
Yeah, they're literally writing bills that they say that they disagree with. Basically.
Right. Yeah. It's just really silly to me. So as I was talking about some of these bills, do you see anything that in the and I mean like the entire history of the pro-life movement? If we I almost want to put like some kind of ecclesiology framework around it. It's like the greater pro-life movement. Sure. We would all be encapsulated in that. And with a capital P as opposed to like little
the greater anti-abortion movement. Maybe.
yeah. The pro-life movement universal, right? The Catholic.
Oh yeah, you did the Catholic thing.
The
Yeah.
pro-life. In the Catholic technical sense.
I think you'd have to make it the lowercase then. It's like Catholic with the lowercase c is the everybody.
Is the every? Oh, okay. I've been doing it wrong this whole time. Okay, so in the whole history of the pro-life movement, what have there been any successes at all in moving anything forward against Roe v. Wade or against abortion in general?
It really depends on what you count as a success, because the pro-life movement is constantly celebrating successes.
What, as you would consider it?
Yeah, I mean, no. I would basically say no. There hasn't, to my knowledge, there hasn't been one. So it can be tracked on a number of levels, but the basic pro-life strategy is to get a pro-life president in there, so you can appoint pro-life justices, so that they can then overturn Roe versus Wade.
That hasn't worked yet?
No,
No?
no, and it's not just that it hasn't worked, but it's demonstrated the hypocrisy of the pro-life Republican platform.
Right.
Because first of all, it was Republican justices that gave us Roe versus Wade in the first place. But one can make an argument that they, back then there wasn't a pro-life issue, so maybe they were just bad Republicans, or that wasn't part of the party platform at that point. So you can fast forward in time, and you look at Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which was the next really big abortion case. But by then, the pro-life movement had been successful in stocking the courts with basically people who were pro-life Republicans, or who had been appointed by pro-life Republican presidents. And in there, and this is what the courts always do, and this has been repeated about, I think, 20-ish times over history, but the courts reaffirmed the ruling in Roe. They actually, in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, they admitted that the Roe versus Wade decision may not have actually been in the Constitution. That was like in the notes. But to go against it now would be to overturn prior court precedents. And so, yeah, so the courts basically are not allowed to admit that they're wrong, at least in this issue, is what it boils down to.
They do that all the time.
They do all the time.
Yeah.
It's not on this issue. And it's like, what you have is you've got people who are personally pro-life, is what they are. But then even as they're being vetted by the Senate or whatever to get that position, they say, well, yeah, I'm not going to overturn Roe, basically.
They just lie, and then they can get away with it, and then when they get
well, I think that's what the pro-lifers are expecting you to do.
Yeah, right.
But no, they just don't, because they want the position. They want the basically upholding the authority of the courts is more important. And it's just really trippy, because the courts don't even have an authority to make laws. It's not, what they're doing isn't constitutional.
Right.
It's just something that we allow them to do. But yeah, no. So
yeah, it's an insane thing. I mean, there's nothing stopping a state from passing a law.
They did it in the days of slavery. Like the Gird versus Scott decision was the court case in the abolition of slavery. It's never been overturned in the history of the country. So the Supreme Court ruled that a slave was 3/5 of a person in terms of their voting capabilities, but they ruled that way. And states just basically, they had more.
Hey, slaves can't vote, man. I'll tell you, but
the slave states wanted them to be able to vote to get more, to get more sway. But basically, that's never been overturned. And what the states did is they actually were a lot closer to what the states were supposed to be.
I don't know that I'd want that overturned. Would you want that overturned?
Ruling that a slave was 3/5 of a person?
Yeah, a slave.
No.
As far as the purposes of counting for the census.
I don't know. I feel like there's a trick question out here. I would want it overturned because it treats human beings differently on the basis of whether or not in the American context they're black.
What I want slave holding states to have more political power, because they can count their slaves as being represented, even though they don't consider them even a whole person.
I got what you're saying. I believe that was a different issue, right? So the counting of slaves as a citizen was, I believe, legislation, and then this was a court case determining what people could count. So yeah, if you overturn that, then you're going to give the slave states greater voting capabilities. I think it comes down to the same thing where it's like, even if that hurt me in terms of my political power, I'm not going to do evil so that good may come. I would want that overturned because it's not ultimately politics.
Was the Dred Scott? Is that that was a court decision, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Court decision. All right. So that's not the constitutional 3/5 compromise that we're talking about.
No.
No. Okay.
And I could be mixing up my facts.
I thought the Dred Scott was dealing with something differently. I didn't think that was the 3/5 compromise that's in the Constitution.
And they fact check me on that.
I think there's a good reason why we don't take out amendments from the Constitution. We can overturn them with new amendments, but even the prohibition of alcohol is still in the Constitution. It's just overturned by a later amendment.
I know there's stuff that was in the Constitution previously that amendments changed. Like slavery was originally constitutional, and so I know that they strike stuff out of the Constitution body itself. And they don't usually display it on websites now that display the Constitution. Like it's omitted from it. But I guess I don't know. I don't know how that technically works.
Yeah, I don't know. We're out of our wheelhouse, guys.
Yeah.
We don't need to talk about constitutional law. Neither of us are Ted Cruz or Ben Shapiro, so we're gonna dip out of constitutional law and go to something different. So so we met because I saw your video on YouTube, right? And I think it was the Pietist Movement one.
Pietist one, yeah.
Yeah. That's which I'd never heard of, so I was like, I gotta watch what these guys say.
I've never heard of this thing, so suddenly I'm interested to watch it.
Yeah,
that's the mark of somebody who's truly a Renaissance
man. Yeah, I didn't know anything about it, and I've forgotten most of it. So so explain it to me again. No, I actually was pretty interested in the Shadow Covenant stuff that you had written about. Now, is that something that you came up with on your own, or is that something that
it's completely original theology?
Oh man, we are jumping headfirst into the ocean of heresy here.
Yeah, it's bad.
Let's just make everybody mad. So, give me the basic gist, because that was another thing that I heard you talking about. Now, I wouldn't call it heretical.
I don't think it is.
No, not at all. Because you do kind of borrow things from other things that have already been established as being like, whether they're disagreed on, they're still like, they're not heresies. Yeah.
Well, it's like there's a lot of stuff that Christians disagree on, different theological systems,
right?
Calvinists versus Arminians and whatnot. So this is regarding a disagreement between covenant theology and dispensationalism. So sorry if you're some random dude on the internet watching this. Those are big, complicated theological terms. What they're trying to do is they're trying to understand. When you go to the Bible, often people will read it and they'll be confused as to how it all relates together. And these are ways of trying to understand how this massive story of redemptive history is structured. What is God ultimately saying? What's the flow of redemptive history? And different people have come to different conclusions on that. The two big camps are covenant theology and dispensationalism. And there's incessant disagreement among Christians. I am not a fan of, I shouldn't say that I'm not a fan. I actually appreciate aspects of both systems, but I don't think either one is fundamentally accurate.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's kind of like the way I'm thinking about a lot of theological systems. I like postmillennialists in a lot of their a lot
so do I.
Yeah, a lot of the conclusions they come to, but I disagree with the way that they get to those conclusions.
Right. Yep.
And it's kind of the same thing with covenant theology. I think there's a lot of great conclusions there. I disagree with the way they get there. Same thing with dispensationalists.
Right. Yep. I just wish like the majority of the like wackos were on the covenantal side and not the dispensationalist side. Because
hey man, it'd be nice to get some of the wackos out of
man, we got some doozies, man. I mean, it's hard to even be associated with some of those guys.
Yeah.
And
there are legit heresies that come out of that.
Oh yeah, and the characters. Oh my goodness, like some of the memes are well deserved. But it would be shocking. Actually, I'm like a closet dispensationalist among all my
all your Reformed brethren there.
All my Reformed guys. But
what attracted you to dispensationalism?
Strangely enough, yeah, I was raised in a Presbyterian church, but they weren't exactly all that covenantal in their teaching. They weren't exactly all that Presbyterian. They're much more Presbyterian now. They have a very, from what I understand, a friend of mine is a pastor at that church, and just recently became a pastor there. But they have a new lead pastor who's like pretty reformed. This guy is like legit Presby, you know. Which, I mean, you know, like, I'm not a Presbyterian anymore, and I don't really hold a lot of those views, but I think that's a much better place for that church to be in, where they know what they believe and they're teaching what it means to be a Presbyterian, than essentially like how I grew up. Even though I love the people there, I don't want to, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I had great Sunday school teachers and stuff like that, people that, you know, invested in me, but I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue what it meant to be a Presbyterian, other than it was a weird name to say to your friends when the majority of the people that you went to school with were Catholic. So, but I mean, I was pretty much raised like to understand, to have like a premillennial view of eschatology, and I'm pretty like influenced by John MacArthur, I guess, and listening to his explanations of things. And then the church that I ended up at for like the last 15 years, in the Evangelical Free Church, was like definitely pre-mill, which was weird because they didn't have like very strong views on almost any other position.
Oh yeah, I know churches like that.
No, my church did. My church did, but the denomination itself
gotcha.
didn't. Even in their book, Evangelical Convictions, it kind of laid out like, okay, this is what it means to be covenantal, and this is what it means to be dispensational. Take your pick.
Yeah.
You can be Calvinist, you can be Arminian. Take your pick. And then I'm like, okay, I can see where this is going. And then it got to eschatology, and I'm like, you better be pre-mill, or you are not going to be a pastor in this church. You are out of here, buddy. You know. So like, get your pre-mill stuff ready. You know. So there were a lot of good pastors that were like kind of closet amillennialists, and even now, but they've since lifted that. So all the amillennialists have come flying out of the woodwork. They're all over the place. But even through that, like, I still kind of like remained like, because I didn't really have a position until I studied that, right. And just from my own study, I was like, I'm premill dispensational. Like, I get it. You know, I thought it was more convincing of an argument. Yeah. But that's not to say like there's plenty of stuff in covenantal thinking that like
it's a lot of fantastic stuff.
I'll listen. Like, I'll eat it up. You know, no problem. You know, I really have a difficult time getting worked up about it, to be honest with you. Like, I really don't see what all the hubbub is about, to be honest. Like, a lot of the things when I hear covenantal preachers speaking, I'm like, yeah, amen, brother. Like keep preaching. Like, I got it. Like, I could totally adopt that, no problem. And I don't see where the contradiction is, honestly. Maybe there's probably somebody, like, if they're listening to this, they're like just throwing rocks at the screen right now. You're like, you moron. Like,
I think a lot of it.
Read a book.
A lot of it kind of comes down to some of the fruits of the different positions.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Do you believe in infant baptism or not, or whatever the case may be?
Right.
Yeah. But I agree. It's like there's a lot more warring that goes on there than I think is warranted or necessary.
Yeah.
For me, it was like, you know, all of us, we go through a desire to understand the Bible, right? And as I'm going through and I'm trying to understand how do the Old and the New Testaments fit together, it's tough. So the covenantal position basically has something that views strong continuity, which means that a lot of what's found in the Old Testament still applies to the Christians today. And so that leads them to emphasize things like Sabbath worship, whereas dispensationalists would typically say that the Sabbath was like an Old Testament thing. These different, they'll draw lines like dietary laws of the Old Testament are no longer binding, and they'll cite New Testament examples. But there isn't, as I've looked at it, I haven't really found a very clear, very, very clear reason to believe what covenant theology chooses to include and what they choose not to.
That's been part of my wonder on a lot of things. It seems like the delineations vary back and forth, and I just want it seems a little bit subjective to me.
Yeah,
that
I agree.
it's like I don't know how you came to this conclusion of like whatever, but like why does the like the dietary laws? An interesting thing. There was a guy I knew who was like a Messianic Jewish guy, and he was all about land-basing Christians for not holding to the dietary laws and things like that. And like, no, when Peter had his vision, that's not what that meant. It just meant, had nothing to do with the food. It just meant that the Gentiles were part of Israel again, or whatever. And his like very high view of the law and in like everyday Christian life. But then he hated covenant like reform guys, like because they were like replacement theology, and they were like not very pro-Israel kind of guys and things like that. So like,
but they love all these laws.
They love the law, and I'm like, all right, well that's interesting take. I'm like, the last guy I argued with about this like was in that camp. That's
well, yeah. So the dispensationalist side can kind of err in the other direction. I don't want to say error, but
it's all right.
They can go in the other direction. Sorry, I wasn't saying that for your benefit. I actually think they're both errors, but and I don't think it's right. I don't think the category is right to view it on a scale of continuity.
Right.
Because dispensationalists also view a scale of continuity, and that's kind of where I've come to, is that they're actually very similar ways of thinking about the Bible. It's just they differ in the amount of continuity.
Yeah.
But basically they'll, and I'm just saying this for your viewers because it's a confusing thing. But basically they'll say that there's these like hard lines where God was working in the earth in a certain way, and then he began working in a different way. So like before the flood, there was no human government. After the flood, there was human government. I actually agree with that. But therefore now this period between the flood and Abraham, which is the next dispensation, is the dispensation of human government. And kind of the problem that I have with that is that the theme of human government still continues on through that. And it's like you don't see like a clear end to that until after the millennial reign of Christ, really.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like it's more like there's these overlapping themes that may begin at a point in time. So I started to do with Shadow Covenant Theology as I started to, kind of question the foundation of looking at redemptive history as a single story that's chopped up in certain ways and with certain degrees of continuity. And what I do is I view basically this idea of a higher and a lower covenant. So borrowing from covenant theology, that there's a covenant, a promise that God has given to redeem mankind, that is stretched from the beginning of time until the end.
Yep.
But then what we have in the law of Moses, which is where a lot of this confusion is that we have a shadow covenant. A shadow in Christian thought is a type, is another word for it. It's something that's a picture of another thing. And so it begins with a promise that's given to Abraham. Just like there's a promise that was given to Adam about a future redeemer, there's a promise given to Abraham about a future redeemer named Moses who's going to come and redeem the people from
Keep going, my camera.
Oh, yeah. And so basically this promise given to Abraham parallels, or it's a shadow of the promise given to Adam. The Redeemer that came in Moses is a shadow or a type of Christ. These are all things that are confirmed by the New Testament, or some of them are confirmed by the New Testament. And basically the story that we find in the law, that's the big question of does this law apply to Christians or not? I view it as, that's a bit complex, but I view it as fundamentally not applying to Gentile believers. It may, in certain circumstances, apply to Jewish believers. But basically it's, I'm probably not explaining this well.
Hey, man, you're just making this up as you go.
Yeah, right? It doesn't have to make sense. Dispensations don't have to.
Yes, right.
Just kidding. But it's the conflict that we see in the New Testament between do Gentile believers have to obey the law? That's where a lot of the issue comes in between dispensationalists and covenantalists, because covenantalists point to the fact that the New Testament authors would appeal to like the command for children to obey their parents and whatnot,
Right.
and like you can inherit a lot of this great moral content from the Mosaic Law, but at the same time, there's this battle going on in the early church to really against the Judaizers, against these people who believed that the Gentiles were under the law of Moses, and the entire emphasis, and it comes down to like circumcision, which was a sign of the covenant of Moses, that Paul really fought against this. Peter and others really fought against these people that wanted to circumcise the Gentiles as a symbol of them being under the law. And so it's like, as I look at the New Testament, I'm like, well, I really don't think Gentiles are under the law, but there's still some way in which that law applies to us. So
Sure. Yeah.
In what way is that? Well, that law is a shadow or a type of this higher law of Christ that the New Testament talks about. And so when it's talking about a law against murder, right, that's in Jewish law, that's only in terms of what can be punished, what's enforceable. That's only for actual physical murder. But in terms of what Christ brings to the table, right, you've heard it said of old, you shall not murder, but if you're angry with your brother in your heart, you've murdered him in your heart. It's like he really brings it back to the foundation.
That's the higher law, right?
The higher law of Christ.
Yeah.
And that's still...
Because otherwise, what are we left with then for why we convict murderers? I mean, like, even a dispensationalist says, like, of course.
Yeah.
Like, of course we do. Like, well, then what are we appealing to?
Right.
Well, we're just appealing to natural law? Like what is it that we're on about that we're going to convict somebody for murder? Like, why is it a sin?
Because we're in a dispensation of grace.
Yeah, it's just self-evident, because our Constitution says don't murder people. Of course not,
Yeah,
of course it's God's say so that murder is sinful and it's His law.
Good.
So that was a pretty good explanation in a short period of time, and maybe we can get together again and talk about that some more, because I think it's pretty interesting.
Thanks.
But we've been on here for like an hour and 7 minutes.
All right.
That was pretty good.
Episode.
Yeah, I think it was my best one yet.
Oh, shucks.
Best out of 3. You're gonna have a lot to go up against.
That's true.
But you might have to go up against a professional wrestler next time. So.
Oh, we can't compete with that.
Yep.
I was a professional wrestling watcher at one point.
Oh yeah.
I did watch WWE for a while.
Was it WWE by that point?
I think it was right when it changed, actually.
I think I was already too old to be watching wrestling anymore. But then.
I was.
Sorry,
too.
friends.
There was a girl.
All right, bro. Well, thanks.
Cool.
Thanks for doing this with me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Which button do I hit to end this thing? All right. See you later, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. Do a little dance on the way out. We don't do dances.
Got a Pentecostal.
Yeah. Former Pentecostal.